All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another vlog. Today, I'm joined by my friend Justin, who has not been on this channel yet, I think. There might have
No.
been one video way back. I think I visited you and Ian, and Ellie was in it, but people would have to dig. This is years ago. But nonetheless, thank you for joining, Justin.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
He and I go way back, I think 2008 or so,
10.
2007, 10?
2010.
Okay. I was bad with the
Yeah,
friendiversary,
a while ago.
but a while ago. God, time flies. I felt like that was just yesterday, but it really wasn't. But yeah, I wanted to have Justin join. He has a YouTube channel of his own. I'll put that in the description, so be sure to subscribe to that, and I'll mention that a few times. Where he's gone through various things. He does workouts, how to do certain workouts, especially for rowing. So if anyone needs to learn some rowing skills, Justin is your guy. But he's also done kind of one-on-one conversations to the camera with his audience, and it's actually really good, kind of deep thoughts and conversations around things ranging from depression to anxiety to midlife crises. And that's the one I wanted to hone in on today, was midlife crisis, because that video really struck a chord with me. I, for my viewers out there, I just turned 40. I don't know if I mentioned this on that channel. I say just turned, but I'm like 40 and a half at this point.
You could still say
Not,
just turned. Yeah.
just turned.
You're 44, and then you.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
the grand scheme of things, I just turned 40. And so I've gone through some thoughts as well of, sort of what am I doing with my life? What's next? And I say that because I haven't mentioned this on this channel. I've worked mainly at Google. That's where Justin and I met. I joined Google. I was there for about 14 years. I resigned, largely due to a micromanager. Never went into that in depth on this channel. Maybe we'll save that for another day. Went to another company, actually came back to Google for a year and a half, and then recently resigned again for the same reason. And the micromanager, of course, had a lot of things to unpack with my anxiety and all of those things. But again, maybe I'll save that for another day. But part of that process of like leaving Google the first time was feeling like I lost my identity a bit, because you don't realize how your identity is so tied to your job title, really. And that's something Justin mentioned in his video. And that's what really stuck with me, is there's so much with like job titles and titles in general that we tie to that. So it's kind of an interesting inflection point in my life, because I am 40 now. What am I going to do next? I had these titles for jobs that most of them I wasn't that enthusiastic about, to be perfectly honest. Some of them I really enjoyed, but some of them were more just like, I had a good experience with my coworkers and I definitely learned a lot, but it wasn't necessarily what I felt like I was, like, let's say, called to do. So that really struck a chord with me too. But maybe we can like start with that point, because Justin, you mentioned this in your video, and I think it's actually a really interesting thing, is how much we tie titles throughout our lives, not just job, but even you were a star athlete. You can go into that. I definitely was not. I was never good at sports, so never tied like those titles to myself. But there's a lot with like we tie our identity to titles and things like that. So hoping you can expand on that a little more too.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Identity and the reason why I brought it up as a topic on my channel is because it is part of, I think, the overall mental health conversation. And my channel, like if I zoom out a little bit, it's not necessarily, it's not first and foremost like an exercise or fitness channel, although that is certainly part of it. But really why I started creating content was I'd gone through a pretty tough time the last 3-4 years. Some personal events, like, my mom passed away. There was obviously the pandemic, which affected all of us. There was being a parent of 2 very young kids during a very difficult time, juggling a high pressure job. It was sort of all of that combined, I think, really took a toll on my mental health. And I recognize that my story, my situation is far from unique, right? There are, I mean, dare say, I think the majority of working parents, not necessarily just parents, but just, working professionals, when they reach midlife, I think it's very normal to have those existential questions of,
Mhm.
well, it's sort of, I feel like when you're in your 20s, you're so worried about establishing your foundation financially that you don't even really have the time to stop and think like, well, why am I doing this? Right.
Mhm.
You're just kind of heads down. Many of us don't have as many other responsibilities, so it's easier to just keep that singular focus on work. Again, getting established financially. And sort of at that point, I think classically for people in their 30s, maybe when kids come along, you've been working for 20 years or so, you start to lift your head up and you go like, wow, I'm spending a lot of time doing this. And it's taking away time from other things I could be doing. Like those trade-offs become
Mhm.
much more or much clearer. And I think that begets a bunch of questions around like, well, again, why am I doing this? Do I like doing this? Like, shoot, I should be spending time with my kids. I'm not spending enough time with them. Oh, crap, I'm not spending any time on myself and my
Mhm.
health. And it's very, very hard to balance all of those things. And so that is really what I'm hoping long term to do with my channel is just kind of, again, like find my own health, find my happiness. Happens to be through rowing right now, but it might be something else
Right.
down the road, and just talk about some of the challenges that I think many, many, many of us go through related to mental health. So that's just a little bit of backstory, but yeah, I mean, so I think, and actually, I'm planning to publish a video probably in the next couple of weeks where I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. But going back to my childhood, um, I didn't have a lot of confidence. Like I was bullied a lot. It wasn't until I found sports
Mhm.
and, lucky for me, because God knows if I hadn't found sports, I don't know what I would have done, but like I happened to be a good athlete. And so that was in sports with how I found my confidence. And so I identified first and foremost through most of high school. And then when I continued on in college, I identified first and foremost as an athlete. It was a very core part of my identity and a lot of my self-worth and just how I felt day to day kind of hinged on my performance in the athletic realm, right? And then of course college finished. I didn't, I hung it up, so to speak, sports wise. I mean, I did stuff recreationally, but not competitive. And my identity, once I joined Google, then became, well, Google employee. You joined like
Mhm.
one of the best companies in the world,
Yep.
right? Very hard to get into. And at 2010, when I joined, Google was still, I mean, still is a great place to work now. Don't get me wrong. But back then, I think it had there was much more mystique around it.
Yeah.
And so very quickly, yeah, I became a Googler. And I didn't have any kids at that time. Again, very few responsibilities, spent a lot of my time at the office. I was there probably 10, 12 hours a day, right? Like
Right.
many of us were at that time. So your identity, your friends, a lot of it revolves around Google. Um, I'll pause there for a second. I don't know if you want
Yeah.
to,
No, that was
there are any other questions, but before I just keep rambling,
no, I was gonna say an interesting point. And it is kind of a tangent from like a midlife crisis, but I think it's an interesting point, is you meet people, and you think you have a perception of them. So you have this like story in your head. So I met you in my 20s. We both met in our 20s. And so I just thought, I mean, the viewers can't tell this right now, but you're like six something. You're very tall. And I thought like, oh, like, and you went to Stanford. And so I just pictured like things, kind of are going great for you and probably always have, but you don't know kind of past traumas people have gone through. And there's so much of that people, don't really know about. And it's good to open up and share about it. But like the bullying you mentioned, that can definitely have a lasting impact on also shaping your identity in the future, in terms of almost like almost like an I'll show them mentality, I would think.
Yeah.
And because I was like, I'd say I put myself down a lot. My therapist told me to do a little more positive self-talk. Probably bullied less than people would picture, but still was, especially like emotionally. Kids are it's just rough, like the things kids say
Yep.
and do all the way from elementary school. I think finally in high school I started using humor as a way to like deflect and protect myself from that, including self-deprecation. But it's interesting. It's just an interesting point that, like, yeah, you don't know people's entire past, and when you meet them, you're only getting a piece of them at that time, and then you're also building up your own perception of them in your head, and it's often wrong. Actually, not that
Mhm.
it's fully wrong. I mean, I know you're a nice guy, we've been friends forever, like that's all right, but there's things about your past I'm still finding out. I didn't even know about the bullying till just now, for
Mm.
instance. So it's unfortunate you went through that. It's unfortunate so many people do, but I think
No, and
that, yeah, that could have a big like influence on what you did later
I
is
was
all.
gonna say, I'm pretty sure he and my wife,
Mm.
for viewers, I'm pretty sure Ian's shown you the photos. I'm sure she busted them out at some point, the childhood photos.
I shouldn't be surprised
Yeah,
because it
you
came up
really
as a Facebook memory the other day, but I did forget.
yeah,
I
I
guess I was
mean,
surprised later on. Yeah.
yeah, elementary school was rough.
Yeah.
And like you said, I mean, that does I think at that age you develop trauma responses, right? And I think you
Right.
said it actually already, which is my response to the bullying and to sort of being a social outcast was, yeah, I'm just going to show you. And the only way I could show people was by just outworking them, right?
Hmm.
Working harder, whatever, just whether it be getting better grades or in sports, like I'm just going to outwork you. And that's something I can control
Hmm.
if I can't
Right.
control these other things. And so, um, and then that works, going back to identity and kind of midlife crisis, like that approach works, or at least I guess worked for me through school and even at Google to an extent, right? Like you can work
Yeah.
harder, you can work longer, that will get you far. But when it comes to I don't know, being a good spouse or being a good parent, the just working harder, it's much harder to figure out how to do that, right?
Yeah. Right.
There's no I mean, despite all the books out there that you can buy on parenting
Right.
and relationships, there is no playbook that you can just pick up and follow and like boom, you're going to be a great parent because everyone's dynamic at home is just unique and
Right.
different. And so that was, I think, where I really started to struggle, really, really struggle when I'd say after Aiden, my son, was born. He's our youngest, and probably I don't know, it was 2020, 2021 ish. And like, I'll come back to and say that again, my story is not unique because 2020, obviously a lot of us were going through a very tough time with the pandemic. A lot of us had young children. We were stuck at home, nowhere to take them. Schools were closed. We had to juggle our jobs on top of parenting. And we were fortunate that we actually could work. So again, I
Hmm.
want to keep things in perspective. Like we were able to work from home, which many people couldn't do. So fully recognize that how lucky we were. Um, but then I think that whole situation compounded with my mom passing away in the fall of 2020. I basically had like a mental break at one point.
Yeah.
Where like my brain just almost like stopped functioning,
Yeah.
and that kind of triggered, I think that really sent me on my way to depression, which I just basically neglected for the better part of 2021, most of 2022. And during those 2 years, I was asking a lot of those classic midlife crisis questions like, wow, why am I doing this? I don't like work, kind of blaming work a lot of times, like thinking that, oh, if
Hmm.
I just change jobs,
Yeah. Yeah.
then somehow magically things will be better. And I recognize in retrospect, work was never the problem. And of course, yeah, like were there things that could be better about work? Sure. But I don't think changing jobs would have helped me as much as I thought it would have.
That's a really interesting point too. Hopefully you can remember what you're going to say next, but it's true because I think up until recently, I was in the same mindset of if I just do this, if I get this job, if I
Mhm.
get this house, if I get this thing, and it's a lot of just things and things that are outside of our control. Like we don't fully control those. And you do get that like dopamine hit, you know, when say you get a new job. Of course, you're like ecstatic at first, and then reality sinks in of was this the right job for me? This has happened to me a lot. You know, what did I get myself into type of thing. And then even with the material things, even a thing as big as a house, which is a great accomplishment for any, you know, anybody. But if you're, you know, getting this home, but it's kind of to I'm struggling with words, but like to compensate. There we go for something else. That's not going to last. But it took me a long time to realize that too, and even like I'd say up until recently, especially with the job piece, thinking like this will be if I just land just that right thing, uh, I'll be set, I'll be happy, and it's just not true. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's I think a fallacy a lot of us fall into of, oh, if I just change X, whether it be job, maybe it's your partner, you're like you're not happy in your
right,
relationship, like, oh, if I just change this one thing, I'm going to magically be happier, feel better, be less stressed, whatever it is. And I remember when I was depressed, there were times like I would, and I was seeing a therapist at that time, but of course I was doing a little bit of my own research and digging into this stuff. And I remember reading, I think it was kind of a common refrain that I would read. It's probably on Reddit or like other forums where people were chatting about depression, and it really resonated, which is it's very it's very easy to again think that to look ahead and think, oh, if I just change this, I'm going to be
right,
better, versus trying to build the life you want like right now. It's always, oh, I'm like trying to do this in the
right,
future, or I'm whatever. I'm willing to sacrifice XYZ now. Yes, I'm miserable, but like, you know what? It's going to be worth it 5, 10 years from now. Who knows
right.
why, right? Like, or if you'll even be alive in 5 or 10 years, versus trying to. And I know it sounds cheesy and like one of those self-help kind of platitudes, but like trying to build the life you want now, and by that it doesn't necessarily mean, or the way I interpreted that was, okay, the most important thing I can do is really focus on myself, my family, my kids, Ian. Like those are the people that are
Mhm.
always going to be there, right? Jobs will come and go,
Right.
as the layoffs the last couple of years have shown
Yeah.
us, right? Like, so I think it was through therapy, talking with Ian, my wife, a lot about this stuff. It took me a couple of years to like
Yeah.
finally get to the point where, and I know I'm trying to tie this back to identity, but where I I think well, maybe it was a semi-conscious decision, but decided to, or was okay with, I guess, having work play a much smaller role in my identity, or just
Yeah.
basing my self-worth off of work a lot less. And I think part of it also was because I had kind of stagnated at work, at least from a career trajectory standpoint. I'd sort of flatlined
Hmm.
um, a few years ago. So I think I'd already had time to kind of process that. Like I'd gone through whatever the 7 stages of grief, like whatever you want to call it, and just sort of
Right.
like accepted, okay, look, I'm not going to hold a very senior title. Like that's okay. So I'd kind of already
Yeah.
accepted that. And so I think that helped me then say, well, look, like I still like working at Google overall. It still affords me, I'm able to take care of my family, but it's not who I am. Like I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got these other things going on. Like that is more important. Easier said than done, right? It literally took me kind of years to get to that point.
Right. Especially because we're conditioned from such a young age to look at those successful moments, you know, especially in Western culture, as it is around career. It's around money and success, and then these achieving these milestones and climbing to the top and be a billionaire, be a CEO. And that's just not going to solve everything for everyone. I mentioned this to you last time and I looked up the quote and I'm gonna get it wrong again. But there's a Jim Carrey quote where he said, I hope everyone makes it to the top, like gets whatever they want in life and makes it to the top. Of course, he's talking about more material and accomplishment things, and then realize when they're there, there's nothing there. There's just more of wanting to get more of that, and it's an endless kind of cycle. I think it's good, obviously, to have goals and pursue things you want to do, but when you tie too much of your happiness around titles and material things, and if I, like you said, if I do this, if I achieve this without addressing kind of underlying things going on within you, you're not actually facing the problem. You're just continually doing these like band-aids without realizing it. And it does take it took both of us till roughly, now I know you're a few years younger than me, but it's funny, it took like, kind of mid to late 30s to start realizing these things. But it was a major life change once you realize it.
Well, and I think part of what helps us realize that is that the further on we get in our careers, the longer you work in our case, tech, the more you interact with more senior people, right? Just the more you see, and you start to realize that, hey, actually, a lot of these people who maybe in my 20s I would have thought were super successful, they must be super happy, they're actually pretty miserable too. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you see rates of, now I don't have specific numbers. I'm sure there's probably research out there, but my own family doctor, I think I mentioned this to you the other day. My own family doctor told me, hey, like you would be, when I was seeing him about mental health stuff, he was saying you'd be shocked at the percentage of tech workers in Silicon Valley that suffer from depression, anxiety, right? Like the list goes on and on and on. So clearly money, power, title, status does not buy happiness,
right?
As the saying goes. And so that really then makes you wonder even more, well, like, oh, okay, why am I on this hamster wheel?
Right.
For what? Right? Like in my case, objectively, we were more quote unquote successful. Like we had, our dream house, financially we were like at least established, like everything on paper looked good, but I was the most unhappy I'd ever been. That was like a real, like something is really wrong epiphany for me when I was like, I'm the least happy I've ever been, actually, even though on paper I have the most. Like
that's amazing, right? How that happens. Yeah, no, and that's usually what happens, because that's when the realization will set in. Sometimes you're just like, why am I like? Did you feel guilt when you went through this? Like, what was the realization also of like, oh, I should probably talk to a therapist as well. Maybe this is a like mental thing I should look into.
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely did feel guilt. I felt guilt for I would say I often wondered like, man, I have great job on paper. Like I'm not having to work 60-hour weeks. Like this all sounds great. And yet I'm still unhappy with it. Like what's wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me that I can't be thankful or appreciative or grateful for this situation that I'm in.
Yeah.
I think definitely felt guilt around that. And again, that's probably common too, right? I think a lot of people in tech feel that way. But what really, and I think by now the scope of this conversation is broadened beyond just
which is what I thought it would. Yeah, I thought
it's all related. I think what really made me recognize that, okay, something is truly wrong, I'm not just unhappy with work, is I was not present with my kids or with Ian. I was very short and impatient at home, like just not myself, very, very much not myself. And that manifested in the way I interacted with again, like my family. And so especially with the kids, that's when it really became an issue, like a code red. Okay, this is not okay, because I wasn't being the dad I wanted to be. Not that I necessarily am now. I think there's still room for improvement for sure. But yeah, that was like, okay, I'm really screwing this up. Like if I don't do something drastic, or at least like, and Ian and I did a couple years worth of couples therapy, where a lot of the conversation was around like co-parenting and how we
Mm.
navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really I would say the straw that broke the camel's back was seeing how it affected my kids and Hian.
Yeah.
Like I guess I would have been willing to suffer in silence for however long, like had it not affected anybody else, but because that was the
Right.
catalyst.
I mean, that's a good, definitely a good catalyst. And it's such a admirable thing to want to be a better dad and, um, be there for your kids. And nobody's perfect. No one's going to be the perfect parent. So hopefully there's a little bit of that pressure also off of you now, but taking like little steps to improve is really good. And that's interesting. That was your kind of inflection point, which is understandable. It was almost like the family recognized it, or especially Ian recognized it. It was kind of, that versus for me, I was kind of, just more on my own, and I was having panic attacks because of work. And then we had an assistance program at work, so I was able to see a therapist, luckily, through that. But it's been a very long self-realization journey for me too. And again, it's like I was saying, it's like I can do the little accomplishments that I try to celebrate now more too. Like I was just talking to my therapist recently about this, of like, be more like, hey, that was good, you did that. I know it seems small for like maybe society that you went to this like party and you have social anxiety, but you went, and taking a moment to pause and also celebrate that. So I mean, I think it's interesting that people realize this in different ways, but the important thing is then be like taking the steps to address it, which both of us are doing, and which is a continual journey. Like no one's ever perfect, and you'll probably never get it 100% right, but these little kind of steps you can take can actually over time really help a lot too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it can be daunting to seek help or know where to start. And I think it is very common, especially amongst type A overachievers, to think like, oh yeah, I can dig myself out of this hole. Like I don't need
Right.
I don't need help. Like, oh, therapist, like, nah, don't need that. Right. And I mean, it just doesn't work that way. Um, just I mean, in my case, therapy was super, super helpful for a variety of reasons. But just to have somebody who can bring that perspective, especially a trained professional, perspective, who's dealt with all sorts of mental health issues before, invaluable, right? Like I would never. I mean, there's just no way I would have come to any of those realizations on my own. So I think just taking the first step can be daunting. But again, going back to what I said earlier, I think the moment you recognize that, well, shoot, if I'm at work, out of every 10 people I see, probably 4 or 5 of them are dealing with the same or similar issues.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Also seeing a therapist, like
Yes.
you feel a little bit better about yourself. Like, okay, there's not something wrong with me. I'm not a weirdo. Like actually a lot of people are going through this stuff.
Yeah. And that's why I really appreciated when you started your channel. And I had done a couple of videos on this channel relating to like anxiety and especially like deep diving into that and dealing with all the side effects of that, and then how to best handle it and approach it. But you had pretty honest conversations on your channel, which is, I was like, oh, so cool. A friend of mine is being open about this, and sharing kind of everything. And it's, again, a lot of things, we've known each other for, I can't do the math, it's so sad, what did you say, 2010? So 14 years. Did it, because it was a 10. Yep. Easy. Google employee right there. And there's things about you I didn't know. And some things of course are obviously like private or what have you, but it's just good, like, oh, actually it's encouraging that you can share with your friends, and nobody has it like I have the perfect life and you have to feel like it's not worth bringing up, or I'm the only one, or feeling guilt around that, because you're definitely not. And everyone goes through things, like Justin said. I mean, it's interesting on paper, and I mean, I definitely kind of saw it that way too, because I only see pieces of your life. It seems like everything you have kind of all the box checks, that for like, oh, this should be a happy life. But understandably, people are very complicated. We're all still figuring that out, and there's a lot to still kind of explore and understand there. And it's the more open you can be with your friends and family with things like this. And I've tried to like start doing that as well once I started therapy, because I was kind of the mindset, like you said, of I can handle this. I don't need a therapist. I don't need medication. I can do this on my own. And I've done the medication thing back and forth of like,
Mhm.
I don't need this. I'm fine. And actually, I had a round of panic attacks a couple weeks ago and back on it. And I'm going to talk to my psychiatrist again, because it's like, actually, no, sometimes like you do need the help. Sometimes you are going through things that you can't fully understand. It's best to like express it too to somebody, and either a professional and or friends or family, and get that out. And then to hear like just the reciprocation of, again, it's not just you. Nobody has everything figured out and it's all perfect and everyone gets their gold star. um it's good. I just, hopefully, like, I was inspired that you had done that. That's why I reached out to you.
Mm.
And like, this videos like this, and I've seen like other podcasts and things, get people to talk more about kind of mental health things they're going through. It's so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate that mental health is, I mean, there's far less of a stigma now attached to mental health issues than there
Yeah.
was even 5 years ago before the pandemic. And I know, I also recognize that I'm sure the tech industry is leading the way. I'm sure in other parts of the country or the world, certainly mental health is still not talked about enough. But what was I going to say? But I mean, that has made me feel much more comfortable sharing these, or just talking about the stuff I do on my channel, because again, I think people are just more open to it,
Yeah.
and less afraid of, or I think people are more open to even admitting that, hey, yeah, I might be dealing with this, or I think this sounds like what I'm going through, versus 5 or 10 years ago. There's probably a little bit more reluctance to admit, right? Just
Yeah.
because it is such a stigmatized thing. And I remember what I was going to say, which is like, and you've probably heard this too, but when you think about mental health as like your brain, your mind is ill, right? Just like any other part of your body would be. And if you broke your arm and someone said,
Yeah.
"Hey, I need you to come into work tomorrow," sorry, you'd be like you're effing crazy. My whatever, my arm's broken, my leg's broken. Like, I can't do that. So why should it be any different if
Yeah.
you're, mentally you are injured, or you're
Yeah.
performing, or you're just struggling?
Yeah.
So that was just a helpful analogy for me.
No, it's
Um,
very true. And I was just gonna say, sorry, and if I, hopefully if you got another thought, you'll remember it. But the being more vulnerable with people, and I got again inspired over the past few years with like listening to certain podcasts, and that like changed my life with, I can actually be vulnerable with people. I can share that like I don't have this all figured out. Some days my anxiety takes more control of me than I would like it to. It inhibits me doing certain things, and it's still a thing I'm working on. But at least I can like share that, and through vulnerability, and it took me a long time to realize this too. That's obviously where you're going to get the stronger relationships. But I think, like in my 20s, like you were saying, you're kind of heads down, and it's like it's all about proving your kind of success, and you see your worth as like, I'm successful, I've got this, whatever condo, I've got this job. And then
sure.
later it's more like, I'd rather genuine deep relationships, and also to really get to know people and to understand, because everyone has a story, everyone's gone through um you know the good, but also a lot of really bad things. And so I'm trying to be a little more like cognizant of that, get deeper relationships with people through doing this. So it's another way to encourage people to continue to share as they have. And it's interesting. One last thing I was going to say is, yeah, even in the 90s, growing up in the 90s, therapy was very stigmatized still.
Yeah.
A lot of shows made fun of it. Like, I remember on the
Mhm.
sitcom The Nanny, the neurotic kind of, and they made her like, she's crazy. Little girl went to see a therapist every week, and her whole character was about how she's basically like just crazy. And like, but I'm so glad now it's shifted more towards like, no, actually, it's healthy and it's good to express yourself and to see professionals and to get help. And it's only a very recent thing, like you said, but I'm glad at least in our lifetime it shifted, because I remember even family members saying, like in the 90s, like I had one family member say like, oh, they're making me see a shrink, and like even using that terminology.
Mhm.
And like now it's like, well, I think it's great. Like it's a, you know, a great thing to be able to go see a
Good
therapist.
time to be a therapist.
Yeah, that's true too.
Plenty of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned relationships, and I think, and again, this is probably something that happens to a lot of people at our life stage, but I would say even just this past year, as I've started to feel, as my mental health has started to improve, I have found myself caring much more about, or just more interested in, like spending time with friends, family.
Right.
Like, I think not that I didn't want to see friends, you know, in my 20s or early 30s or whatever, but it's just different. Like I feel like maybe there's a recognition subconsciously that, oh yeah, like jobs, other things will come and go, but like your friends and your family are, I think I said this earlier too, those are the people that are going to be around.
Yeah.
For the long term, right? So like you should invest in those relationships. And I think I genuinely find, and again, maybe it's because you just have more to discuss when you're at our life stage, but I find that like I'm much more interested in, just like reconnecting with old friends.
Yeah.
So it's I found that interesting because I think I spent a lot of my life chasing fulfillment in, like, I don't know, I'll just stick with sports since you know, I've invested a lot of time in my life in various sports. Like I would find a great deal of accomplishment, and I still do to a degree. Like there's a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment that comes from like hitting a goal or an athletic pursuit, but it's not the same as, I don't know, just like like reconnecting with, like in my case, reconnecting with a couple old friends, or my cousin in particular in Canada, and just like having a really close relationship with them.
Right.
After, you know, 10 years of really not like staying in touch. So just, I feel like there's probably been a void in my life that I didn't really recognize was there, that now is filled, or more filled, and I'm really enjoying that. So
yeah,
and that's just part of, again, just getting older. But
no, it's very true, and something you don't want to take for granted.
Right.
Especially like old friendships. And it's funny, and this is not, I feel like this is like a pitch, and it's like Oprah will be joining us in a second. This book, which actually is what you were talking about, Build the Life You Want.
Art and Science of Getting Happier. Okay.
It was a very interesting read. Arthur C. Brooks was the main person who wrote it, but Oprah wrote little tidbits. And I have to admit, I was a little hesitant with an Oprah book, I'm not gonna lie. But this actually was really good and pretty eye-opening. And it really got down to like a balance between everything we talked about. Like, yes, you want to have meaningful work, but at the same time, you don't fully control all the scenarios with work. So the key thing is, you know, building good, strong relationships, and the like science behind the importance of friendships, connecting with people, having a conversation like you and I are now, and how much that actually contributes to happiness where people don't even realize it. So like you were saying, just overall happiness, because it's like, it's like the art and science of getting happier.
I mean, and there's plenty of science out there too. Not that I've read any of the research, but just I know, and I've seen, I guess, in the news, that people who have, the stronger your social network, the stronger your relationships, there's a very strong correlation between that and longevity as well, right? Like how healthy you are all around, not just mentally, but your physical health as we get older too. So I mean, just it's funny you pulled the book up, because it was making me realize, like, I can't even remember the last time, honestly, I've read a book cover.
Well, I think it's understandable too, because you're a parent of young kids. I do not have kids. I'm able to actually read books pretty quickly.
Even before, no, I'm saying, like, I'm going back to probably like high school, since it might even be that long since I have truly read a book cover to cover. And that's not because I use an e-reader, it's just because I'm very not well read at this point. So
well, you know, I mean, it's, if you like reading, if it's some people, it's not their favorite thing, but as long as you're getting the information somehow.
There's a Cliff Notes version out there. Sign me up.
Oh yeah. Just look it up on AI too. It'll summarize it for you. Any AI tool.
Right.
But it does say that about like relationships, that actually did strike a chord with me at the time, because I had mentioned this to you when we spoke recently, but I was so overwhelmed with work in my last role that weekends was a time to just decompress, but I was like really negating my social life and
Mhm.
connections. And so I'm trying to bring that back. I mean, part of it was just trying to deal with the stress as well. So again, it's part of self-compassion. Like, it was a stressful time. I can't be too hard on myself, but I've really tried to prioritize, given the importance of relationships, pursuing that and making sure that that's a key thing that I'm doing and working on. And it sounds like you are too. And there was one more book I was going to mention. Oh, if I can reach it. Here it is. Have you heard of Stoicism at all? The
Mm-mm.
philosophy. Been following
No.
it. I've been following a lot for years. There's a book called The Daily Stoic, which has interesting like tidbits. It's ancient Greek, Roman philosophy, but it still is relevant today.
Okay.
Key thing that stood out with Stoicism too. I mean, this book is just like examples of things like worrying, envy, what others think about you, happiness. So it's kind of covers all of that through like philosophy. But they talk in here, and I didn't think about this until like I read it, and it really stuck with me. You don't control so many things, and that includes things like jobs and um, other things as well, like health, etc. You don't control those, not to make you like worried or scared, but there has to be a little bit of letting go. Like, you can influence those things. It's not to say like just give up and don't don't
Mhm.
work, don't try to be healthy. You can influence those things, but you have to understand you don't control all those things. And so that was kind of a big revelation for me too. Like, when we're talking about jobs as well, is like things will change. There'll be reorgs. There'll be like, you can't pin everything on, I'm going to be a top person at X company, whatever it is. Not necessarily X, the renamed Twitter.
Yep. Yep.
But that's just setting yourself up for disappointment and failure. You have to be like, yeah, I could try to like get to things where I could feel fulfilled, or whatever goal you might have, but it's not going to be the end all be all, like you and I were talking about earlier. It's not like if you reach it, that's happiness and you're good for life and nothing will ever change, because there's so many outside influences. It's just a good reminder of that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, right, I mean, layoffs in tech have been a very clear reminder of the fact that we don't control whether we're going to have a job tomorrow or not, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's probably helped, certainly for me, and I'm sure many others also, to come to that realization, at least as far as work goes. But I will say that's also, I think, why, um, at least for me, getting back in shape. So it doesn't, not that exercise has to be the thing for everyone. It won't be, right? If you're really passionate about like crocheting, I mean, that could be your thing, right? Or whatever.
Right.
But that is, as that at least is, so my training is something I can control, right? And so on any given day, the things that I can't control, work, who knows what else, if everything around me, everything else around me has been shit and I've had a terrible day,
Yeah.
I can at least say, okay, well, I did this.
Yeah.
Again, for me, it's a rowing workout. For someone else, it could be I spent an hour practicing quilting, whatever. Like,
Right.
but you have that one thing that you do that you're able to control, right? You decide how long you do it for, and you can hang your hat on that at the end of the day and at least have something positive
Yeah.
in your life, instead of what I think many of us have done, just gone through years where like there wasn't, and it takes energy, it takes focus, and a certain amount of willpower to do that and commit to it. But I think once you can start and build a habit like that, it just kind of builds upon itself,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. No, it's so important. You and I talked about that recently too. Yeah, like having hobbies, having other interests is actually incredibly important. And I've always tied more of my actual interest to my hobbies than my job. Yeah, and that has its trade-offs too. But I think it's actually healthy overall. But
Mhm.
that's, things like doing these videos and the comedy videos on the other channel is a big thing. And then, hiking, biking, running, all the other stuff I do, that's just like things I enjoy. I always make sure I have time for those and put those in. I mentioned spending time with people as well, which I've had to put that back, make sure I carve that back in. But it is incredibly important, and you're right, because then you have that you can always hold on to. And I was doing that with my YouTube channels for years when things weren't going as well at work,
Mhm.
depending
Mhm.
on the job. It's like, you know what, at least I have this, I usually upload weekly. I've started to do that, with both channels. And I have this creative outlet, and it's mine, and I can like own
Yeah,
it. And yeah,
exactly.
so that to me has always been more kind of important, and I felt more accomplishment through those than work, honestly. And I laugh because it's like for better or worse, because yeah.
I think that's true. I mean, for many of us, like overall I like my job now,
Hmm.
but I get far more fulfillment from all the things I do outside of work, right? And I
Yeah.
think for most people, myself included, when I was super depressed, for example, it can feel impossible to know where to start, right? It
Mm-hmm.
can just seem very daunting. And again, I'm sticking with exercise just because it's simple. I think most people can relate to it. I think it's easy to feel like if you're super out of shape and you haven't worked out in years and you're super sedentary, to feel like, oh my God, like what I can't work out 5 times a week. Well, it's just like it's too much. I don't have an hour a day, 5 times a
Right.
week. I think in reality, you know, you can start with something super small. It can be, hey, 10 minutes a day, I'm going to go for a walk
Yeah.
or whatever. I'm going to sit on my stationary bike for 10 minutes. I'm going to do that twice a week.
Right.
And then you do that for a month, and then you add another one, right? Like you gradually build. I think
Mhm.
people often feel, certainly I have often felt this way, where it's like all or nothing. Like, oh, I
It's
got to be
a lot of my friends are type
doing
A's,
full
and
tilts, and like
yep,
if I can't do that, then like I might as well just not do it.
I had a talk with another friend, because again, a lot of them are type A's, and I guess I kind of am type A. I should take a test. But uh, same thing. He was all or nothing, and I had a conversation with him of like, because he wanted to get back in shape. You can do what I do of like, it's what you just said. For 10, 15 minutes, I'm gonna go on a small jog, or like take a walk, or take a small hike. Just start with that and make it,
Mhm.
because his whole thing was like, I'm gonna do a marathon because I have to get back in shape. Well, that's a huge leap from couch potato
Yeah.
to completing a marathon. And a lot of people
Yeah.
put that pressure on themselves. So I think it's really good, like you said, to just do realistic habits. Try to keep it to like 10 minutes at first, whatever the thing is, because then it's not too daunting, and then go from there.
You
Yeah.
gotta love it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
love parts of it. Again, whatever your hobby is, right? And especially when it comes to your health, like if you don't enjoy the process of getting healthy, you're not going, or at least if you don't enjoy and see progress and have milestones along the way that you can hit, you won't stick with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. There is a book on this as well called Atomic Habits. You don't have to read it because it's the same
I've
thing you
heard
just
I've
said.
heard of
The
that. Yes.
same idea. Yeah.
Yes.
Like the whole, like, to summarize the 200 pages, it's like just do things. It's like it says Atomic Habits, start small, and then it'll build up over time. And yeah, that could be a really helpful thing too. But yeah, I appreciate you taking this time. Hopefully, we could do another one day, because I feel like there's so much more to say and explore. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, happy
yeah,
to. I think this is one, like, midlife crisis, mental health. I don't think I have figured out yet really how to structure my thinking around it in like a cogent way. So if I was a little all over the
no,
place.
and
Why?
again, this is like how these conversations go. And a lot of that podcast I listen to, Inside of You, shout out Michael Rosenbaum.
Yep.
When you're going to talk about these things, inevitably, you don't have to stick to the one topic, because so many things influence it, like you said. So I kind of thought that would happen. And as we were talking in my head, I was even like, this video will probably be called like an honest conversation about depression, anxiety, and midlife crises, because like we covered a few things, and they all go hand in hand, or they did for us. So that's just how it goes. That's, the flow of a conversation, and there's just so many parts that go into it. So it makes sense, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. And the I guess parting thought would be just, again, and I think I said this a couple times earlier, just if anyone is watching this and sort of wondering or feeling like, yeah, man, this kind of sounds like what I'm dealing with. I think just, there's no need to kind of suffer in silence,
Yeah.
I suppose, right? Like as I've shared, as you've shared, and as more people are sharing generally, like many, many of us, especially in high pressure environments like Silicon Valley are dealing with a lot of these, just a lot of mental health issues, and especially pandemic, post-pandemic, there's a mental health crisis generally still, right? So it's no shame in seeking help. There's no better time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And yeah, definitely really appreciate you sharing like you did and being so open and our conversation. And like I said, subscribe to Justin's channel. It'll be in the description. Is it an easy URL? You want to say it too, or is it one of those? It's the long alphanumeric.
I've not gotten that sophisticated where I have like a short. There probably is. I just don't even know what it is. So
yeah, they kind of changed it. I think everyone gets the alphanumeric. So I'll be sure to put the link for sure. Back in the day, it would have like an extension, like John Brandt Vlogs. I still have that for this channel, but things have changed. But nonetheless, it's a really interesting channel. Definitely check it out. A lot of these topics are covered, like we said. But yeah, really appreciate you taking the time. Definitely stay on for a second. I won't just hang up on you. Post the recording. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, John.